Hey, let's go ahead and start with go through chapter 4 at this point. And you know what? I hope the internet is with me. So, but if not, well, I'll just keep coming back. Okay. Um, Tonight is it's really we start with like one of my favorite topics, my one of my absolute favorite topics, and that's propagation. Yeah, radio wave propagation. I really got into ham radio through listening to shortwave radio, and I started that back in the 1980s, back when I was still in the Army Reserve, and because on shortwave back then, all the major um, countries had shortwave radio stations, for not just goodwill, but also for propaganda. And back then, in the 1980s, the Army Reserve was really just the whole purpose of it was just to fight the Russians.
No, that was. I'm like, look, I've got either the dude who looks like from the guy
Hang
from
on, what do we
Jumanji,
got there?
little guy with the. Oh yeah. I have that, or
Hang on a second.
Hey, Mike, I think you need to mute.
Oh, I thought I did mute. And yeah, I need to close my door too.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that was all right. Let's get back to okay. Yeah, anyhow, so back then, with just what was called a boombox that back then, I had a couple of shortwave bands on it, and with just a whip antenna, I was able to listen to such things as Radio Moscow and also of course Radio Havana, Cuba, the other commie enemies, and but then also there were a lot of other great stations. Radio Deutsche Welle from Germany was an excellent station, had excellent programming. BBC, of course, always. But then also Radio Swiss or Swiss Radio International, Radio Netherlands, uh, Radio Exterior de España. Um, there were lots of countries that had some great stations out there, and that's got me into shortwave listening. And then 20 years later, I decided to make the jump to ham radio. So any rate, hey, let's talk about radio wave propagation. But first, let's go back to this. Tonight we're going to be talking and throwing around terms like, HF, VHF, UHF, and I want to just, uh, Mike actually introduced this to you in chapter 2, but I want to go back to it for just a minute to make sure that, since many of you are new to this, that get more of an idea about what we're talking about. You see, um, your uh, technician license, when you get your technician license, you're going to have like full privileges in this whole VHF band. And the VHF band, it's these are short radio waves, 6 meters, 2 meters, um, and you'll have some uh, limited, very very limited uh, capabilities in the 10-meter band. The 10-meter band, sometimes people call that low VHF. It's really the high end of the HF or the shortwave band. Um, the other thing I want to stress to you is, kind of look at these limits, the VHF band, where you're going to have all these um, where your license is going to allow you to transmit and play around with. All right, that starts at 30 megahertz and goes up to 300 megahertz. The the VHF band starts where the UHF band starts where the VHF band leaves off, and that's at 300 megahertz and goes to 3000 megahertz or 3 gigahertz. And of course, then the HF band is uh, below the VHF band. So the HF band ends at 30 megahertz and starts at 3 megahertz. You notice you go from one band or from one block to the other by a factor of 10. Okay, so 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz, right? Then 30 megahertz to 300 megahertz, and then 300 megahertz to 3000 megahertz or 3 gigahertz. Same thing. Okay, and then the other thing I want you to remember as we're going, because we're going to talk a little bit about antennas also, and you know the length of the antenna, the size of the antenna is often related, and again, depending on the type of antenna you're using, but it's often related to the length of the radio wave. And so what I want you to notice is that down here in the lower frequencies, like 3 megahertz, that's like the 80-meter band. Now that 80 meters, that's what, like 200 and over 240 feet. So that's a pretty good size radio wave. But then as the frequency increases, the length of the radio wave decreases. Okay, so as frequency increases, the length of the radio wave decreases. All right, and I think that's really all I wanted to tell you about that. Okay, radio wave propagation. What we're talking about here is just getting from point A to point B, from your radio to someone else's antenna. Um, Radio waves propagate in many different ways, and and how well it propagates depends on the frequency of the wave and the characteristics of the environment. The environment mostly being the ionosphere if you're going long distances, or if you're in the very high frequencies, uh, local weather conditions will affect it also. All right, there are three different types of ways that your radio wave can travel. The first and easiest to understand is simply line of sight. Just this would be for very high frequencies, and it's from your transmitter to whatever antenna you can find, or your radio wave can find. Your radio wave can find antennas a lot further out than you can. Okay, the next is ground wave, and that's where actually your radio wave is traveling either along the ground or bouncing off the ground a bit. And the third is for ground wave, you can get some distance out of that. A couple hundred miles in good conditions. Uh, sky wave is really where you get long distances. Okay, all right, line of sight, yeah. Your radio wave transfers from one, just in a straight line from your antenna to someone else's antenna. Um, and this is the primary method of propagation for VHF and UHF. So, when I was showing you with a 2-meter band at 144 megahertz, yes, line of sight is mostly the way that is going to travel. There are some specific conditions where it's different, but primarily line of sight is the way your VHF and UHF um, uh, radio waves are going to travel. Okay, now on this, I pulled this out of, this is a nice little simple schematic from the Radio Society of Great Britain. What I wanted to show you is this one little drawing down in the bottom right corner. You notice it's got a nice little arcing here for the sky wave, but the ground wave is the one that's going, just directly across the ground. Now, the sky wave can go thousands of miles. Your ground wave is really only going to go a couple hundred miles at best. And so what that means is that if you're um, transmitting long distances, there is going to be an area um, where you, an area between you and your target at a very long distance. There's going to be an area there where no one's going to be able to hear your signals, and that's referred to as the skip zone, or sometimes they say dead zone, but skip zone is more common for that. I find that sometimes if for instance I'm on the 20-meter band and I'm talking to the last time I was in one of the contests, I was getting all these stations from the south, Texas and Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, Arkansas. But you know what? I was not getting any signals. I was not getting any contacts from Ohio. So Ohio at that point, whatever, my ground wave was not going far enough, and it was in the skip zone um, for my sky wave. Okay, the ground wave at lower frequencies, yeah, it can travel quite a bit. Um, and we're talking about quite a bit for amateur radio purposes. I don't know if you remember, but there used to be up in the Upper Peninsula a a radio site for communicating with submarines. It was a Navy thing, but for communicating with submarines, they had uh, an antenna buried underground, and it was a very long antenna. I think it was a mile long or something. But it can, really, its signals went through the ground. It didn't go over the earth, and but they could communicate with submarines thousands of miles away. But for our amateur radio purposes, a ground wave is really only going to get you a couple of hundred miles at best. Okay. Oh, reflection, refraction, and diffraction. There are a lot of ways your signal can travel. Now, we say line of sight, but we say that kind of with a little asterisk on it, because sometimes your radio wave can bounce around buildings and reflect off buildings or surfaces of water or something, and actually go quite a distance. Your text talked about this knife edge diffraction, where a radio wave going past a very sharp edge in a building, like a corner of a building or something, it could end up with the radio wave being split up and in some areas being very strong and in some areas being dead. That's referred to as knife edge propagation. I don't know why that's such a big deal, but it's always a possible test question. Okay, now reflection and diffraction. This is this. This is I just thought it was real simple little drawings that make things very clear. The difference between reflection and refraction. This is actually something that came out of an old U.S. Army field manual. But you'll notice uh, reflection is just something bouncing right off and coming back at a different angle, like a pool ball coming off a bank. All right. Whereas, and the signal going out and the signal coming down, it may be a little different due to the atmosphere and whatnot, but still, it's essentially the same. Whereas with refraction, um, your your radio wave can be somewhat distorted. All right, and I like the drawing here, the little schematic of showing how a pencil going from one medium to another, going from air to water, because of the way the light bends. Um, it appears that the pencil is bent, but it's really not. The same kind of thing can happen to your radio wave. Okay, UHF and VHF. Now, this is important for technician licensees because this is where all of your transmitting privileges are. Most of, or almost all of your transmitting privileges are. Now, VHF and UHF, yeah, they say the range is actually slightly better than line of sight. And part of that is due to this refraction that we just looked at. The refraction, it actually bends your radio wave just a little bit so you can get further beyond just line of sight. It's like it follows the earth a little bit. So um, and that endpoint, the extra distance, that that further endpoint is referred to as the radial horizon, which is somewhat far beyond your visual horizon. UHF signals are kind of different. Uh, UHF signals can actually penetrate buildings. VHF signals can actually bounce off buildings, but UHF signals can actually penetrate buildings. So it may block line of sight, but reflection and diffraction can get the waves around those obstructions. Now, multipath. Now, the thing is, your radio wave is going out and it can go out not just, particularly if you're in a city and you're transmitting past buildings and whatnot, your radio wave can be split up and, well, and like go to your destination by two different paths. Sometimes if those paths, uh, if the refraction ends up changing the speed a little bit, um, what you can hear at the other end is either an echo or a distortion by the fact that you're receiving the signal twice, but at a little different speed. Okay? And then there's this thing called picket fencing. And I don't know why they make a big deal of it, but by God, it is so often, or it often appears on the test. And what that is that's the fluttering sound that you get. That if, for instance, you're transmitting from a moving vehicle going through a city, if you're transmitting from a moving vehicle going through a country, like up north Michigan where it's nice and flat, you're not going to be a problem. But if you're going through a city, the radio signal that the other person picks up can be a very fluttery sound, being loud and then soft and then loud and soft. That's referred to as picket fencing. Okay, now tropospheric. This is cool, all right? Because although um, VHF and UHF, well, VHF signals we're really talking about here, VHF signals are basically line of sight, and you get just a little more for uh, uh, the radio horizon for refraction and ground wave. Um, there's an atmospheric condition when there's a temperature inversion where, say, I think a cold layer is on top of a warm layer. Or is it the other way around? Anyway, it's when you have two different temperatures in temperature layers in the atmosphere, it can act almost as a duct, and your radio wave can travel, quite a bit more. Um, for line of sight, if you're just standing, if you're a guy about a little less than 6 feet tall, if you're standing
I have a
um,
question.
straight up, yeah, go ahead.
So, in the troposphere, would a radio frequency signal travel farther in a hot um, portion of air, or would it travel farther in a cold portion of air? Just out of curiosity, if you know.
You know what? I used to know that, but I think the deal is that I think it's when the Mike, do you remember? Is it when
My
the
my my brain is telling me that it's when it's cold, it travels further, but I'm questioning that. I'm not. I just I'm not a
the
hundred
deal is
percent sure.
the whole deal is that it's got to be a temperature difference, and um, you can experience tropospheric propagation at different times of the year, and I think it's more so in the springtime and the fall, when there's weather changing going on, and the difference isn't so much just the coldness or the warmth. It's the two of them creating a pathway. So, for instance, um, like I was going to say, a guy standing about 6 foot tall, his visual horizon is, about 3 or 4 miles. His radio horizon might be, 6 or 8 miles, but and of course
Oh,
that changes if you have an antenna way up in the air,
hey
obviously.
Bob.
But
Hey Bob.
yeah.
Just so you know, you talked about a guy who I think started was tall, and then you froze up, and you just came back. So we missed everything you just said over the last probably minute.
Oh, wow. Okay. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm having trouble with the internet here. So, okay, a guy standing about 6 foot tall. He's got a visual horizon of about 3 or 4 miles, something like that. Um, his radio horizon may be 6 or 8 miles. Assuming he's standing with um, a handheld with just a normal um, rubber ducky antenna, you know. So, but with tropospheric propagation, you can get distances of over 300 miles. What comes to mind back just before I retired, this would have been around 2015 or 2016. I was on the way to work, and our radio station, our classical radio station here in the Detroit area, is WRCJ, and the morning announcer, Dave Wagner, is also a ham radio uh, operator, and he was reporting one Monday morning that that there was this tropospheric propagation going on the night before, and that here in Detroit he was hearing hams on the 2 meter band from Chicago. So that's which, and Chicago's about what, 280 or 300 miles something. So anyhow, yeah. So those temperature inversions, um, they can really change the behavior and the performance of your radio waves.
So I have to take a beer, or I've been told, right?
Oh, Mike, would you mute?
Right the first one. Perfect. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I had muted again, but apparently I didn't. Here we go.
Okay. All right. Well, but it sounds like you guys are having fun over there, so that's nice. Okay. All right, the ionosphere. This is where long distance communication really happens. Um, you know what? The atmosphere up there, you get up to 30 to up to about 260 miles. Uh, the atmosphere is pretty thin, but there's enough there's enough particles up there to carry your signal, particularly in times of great sunspot activity.
We lost them again. I'm frozen.
Um, I don't know if you can hear us, Bob,
Yes,
but
I can.
you have frozen up. You've
Hang on.
frozen up. You're unfrozen now though.
Okay. All right.
Wow,
See, when I
that's a
have
shame.
this up, when I have the PowerPoint up, I can't see the icons that tell me if my internet is working. I'm okay now, though, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Oh, this is gonna be rough. All right. Okay. Now the book told you about all the different layers in the atmosphere, the D layer, the E layer, the F1 and the F2 layer. They are very, very cool. But they behave quite differently. Um, where do we go? Ionization varies with solar illumination. Yes, it matters whether it's day or night, right? Because in the day, we have all these layers, the D layer, the E layer, the F1, the F2. But at night, when after the sun goes down, all of a sudden we only end up with really two layers. Um, we end up with
Are we
really the
should we be seeing something, or all we do is see is you? That's all I can see, unless I did something.
um, yeah,
I'm
can you?
seeing your screen. I'm seeing the layers.
Yeah, I'm
No,
seeing
Fantastic
the
world.
scene from Carlos Monilo, Night and Day.
I
Yes,
got
Fun.
it.
yes.
I see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Keep us honest here. Okay. All right. What I like about this is it shows how, during the day, you've got these four layers, but then in the night, all of a sudden you're down to two layers. Now, there's another, I like this one actually a little better. This is something I took out of a real old Navy training manual for electronics technicians. Um, and you'll notice in this top drawing here, and I like this because it shows you the difference in the thickness of the layers. So during the day, you've got a very thin D layer, a fairly substantial E layer, and then an F1 and an F2 layer. But then you get to the nighttime, and the D layer is gone. The D layer is completely gone. The E layer is very limited, and the F1 and F2 have combined, and it's a fairly thick layer. And here's this fairly thick layer at night is what gives you just excellent propagation on the high frequency bands. Okay, so this is below 30 megahertz. Um, this is this is another simple drawing out of that I borrowed from the Radio Society of Great Britain, and again showing you how during the night the F1 and F2 layers combine, and the E layer the D layer is gone completely, but the E layer is also very weak at night. And that's kind of what makes um, your long distance communications better because your radio wave as it travels into the atmosphere, it's not being stopped by the D layer or absorbed by the D layer. It's not being absorbed by the F layer or the E layer. It's going all the way up to the F layer, which is the highest layer. So think about shooting a pool ball on a pool table, where if you get a really long angle, you can get a very long shot. Okay, with the bounce. Okay, in the sunspot cycle, this matters. Like with the ionosphere, the whole issue is the atmosphere gets ionized, and it gets ionized because of the energy coming out of the sun. and the energy comes out of the sun at, with its sunspots. All right. Um, there's there's a limit to how good that is. Sometimes, we get those catastrophic flare events, and that's, can shut down radio communications. But sunspot activity is usually good. The higher number of the sunspots, the higher the number of sunspots, usually the more ionization there is in our atmosphere, and the better our propagation is. And sunspot activity, all right, it follows a normal 11-year cycle. Now, but all cycles are not created equal. Um, Humans have been tracking sunspot cycles and number of sunspots for a long, long time, back to the 1600s. And you can see that, they go up and down, and within each cycle, within each 11-year cycle, it's it starts low, builds up, and then decreases. So this top one, it just shows you, uh, the long history of, tracking sunspot cycles, and shows that, yeah, there's kind of an average there, but every now and then, back in the 1600s, there was an anomalous low period. But the rest, average number of sunspots between, 50 and 100. All right. Now, right now, we are in sunspot cycle number 25. This picture on the bottom is what was going on with sunspot cycle number 24. Number 24 is this one over here on the right. It was terrible, and especially for the 10-meter band. Now, you're going to have some transmitting privileges in the 10-meter band. And if you were trying to transmit back in 2018 or 2019 or 2020 or 2021, it would have been terrible. It was. But now we're in cycle 25, and we're on the way up. The 10-meter band, it's very good, and sometimes it is absolutely smoking. Where on the 10-meter band, I've been able, what have I gotten on the 10-meter band? Um, well, I've gotten to California on the 10-meter band, and I've gotten to, Texas and Florida. Uh, I also, it was pretty spotty, but but I actually got to Brazil, and and this is just with a vertical antenna, not even a, a great Yagi antenna or anything. Okay. Now the ionosphere, yeah, we've kind of talked about that, how it acts like it reflects, right? And they say it acts like a mirror. Sure. Okay. But um, again, it's the lower frequencies that bounce off the ionosphere, right? It's the lower frequencies. So think really below 30 megahertz. So the 10-meter band, the 20-meter band, the 40-meter band, the 2-meter band, which is the big one um, for the technician class license, that one that does not bend with the ionosphere. That goes right through the atmosphere. Now, there's a benefit to that, depending on what you want to do. And the benefit to that is, um, well, obviously, you need something to go right through the atmosphere if you want to connect with a satellite. Our club has put on has assisted in um, uh, having sessions that contact the International Space Station for a couple of high schools around here. We've done it in Macomb County, and we've done it at what is that? The Detroit Aerospace High School. Um, so yeah.
I'd help you, but I'm stuck on the name myself.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's the one out near the Coleman A. Young Airport, City Airport. Okay,
It used to be aeromechanics.
arrow. Okay. Um, all right. So anyhow, yeah, yeah, your 2 meter privileges kind of let you, contact satellites and space stations and whatnot. Okay, because the 2 meter radio wave goes right through the atmosphere. It does not reflect off it.
If
Okay,
I can, Bob,
go ahead.
um, I was one of the radio operators for our last work with that school in Detroit. Um, and I will say that was one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. It was really, really awesome. Um, and keep in mind that the satellite is traveling at 28,000 miles an hour. And so it goes from horizon to horizon in about, 10 minutes. And so you're, you're working at keeping your antenna. You want to use a directional antenna for this kind of thing, like a Yagi. And so you're keeping your Yagi pointed at that satellite and following it across the sky while you make contact with them, and you only got 10 minutes. So it's really, really, really a super cool thing. So that's all I wanted to say about
Okay, very good. Okay, now the skywave, and now they're throwing in another term, skip propagation. That's fine. Okay, it is possible on 10 meters and on 6 meters, but it's in the 2 meter band and UHF almost never. Okay. Oh, oh yeah. Signals can take many paths through the atmosphere. Okay, just like going through just like going through a city and um, bouncing off buildings. Yeah, your radio wave can bounce around in the atmosphere and um, yeah, yeah, arrive at its destination at a little different times with different intensities, and depending on how that works, it can either, if it's coming from two different paths, it can either amplify your signal or cancel it out. So good luck. All right. Uh, oh, sporadic. All right. Now, the aurora. Sporadic E. Sometimes, what they're talking about is, yes, in the E layer, sometimes that can get ionized, and yes, sometimes it can reflect VHF signals, best on 10 meters and 6 meters, but it can also do 2 meters. Now, the aurora borealis, and that's, I it's the aurora borealis over the North Pole, over the South Pole. I think there's another name for it, but that can also reflect radio waves, VHF and UHF. Yes. It sounds a little funny. I'll see if I can play that for you. But same thing with meteor scatter. You can actually bounce a signal off the trail of meteors, because as a meteor travels through the atmosphere, um, it ionizes, it leaves an ionized trail. Now, the thing is, the ionized trail does not last very long, you know, from seconds to a couple minutes. So it takes some talent and patience to do that. There are actually thousands of meteors that, pass through the Earth's atmosphere every day. Most of them not much more than a grain of sand, but there are lots of them, so it's not such an odd occurrence. Oh, okay. Let me try something here. And I'm not totally sure this will work. and I should say it used to work, but I don't know that it does now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and play for you uh, a sound file. Can you hear this?
Not hearing anything, Bob.
Oh,
I can't hear anything.
all right. Hang on. Let me see if I can.
When you share your screen, there's a button you or Jerry told me about um,
Where
for
is?
sharing your sound.
Yeah. Okay. Share. All right. Let's try this now.
Still no sound.
Yes. No. Maybe.
Nothing.
Can you see anything?
I see a radio with 50.130.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, darn.
Did you see
Let
the
me.
button for sharing your sound?
Yeah.
It's a checkbox, and I think it's on the bottom left.
How about now?
Nope.
Okay. How about now?
Nope.
Well, I'll be damned. Okay. Okay. Well, it was a nice try, but yeah, it worked in the past. I don't know why with this uh, latest update to the Zoom, it appears just not to work anymore. So, okay. Module 8. Hang on. Stop share. Okay. All righty. Okay. Uh, Someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Say technician license course,
Yep.
antenna fundamentals.
Yep, thumbs up.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh, I really like talking about propagation, but you know what? There's other stuff we got to cover. So let's keep moving, man. Let's keep moving. And I am so disappointed that I couldn't play those sound files for you. And I just don't, I just don't know what the deal is. I'll have to look into that. you know, and I was so proud because I stole those files from Jerry, you know, it's all that criminal intent for nothing. All right. Hey, we're going to talk about antennas for a little bit. You know, the whole purpose of the antenna, it takes your voice or your data, whatever you're sending, your voice, it takes, you know, your audio energy, turns it into an electromagnetic wave, sends it, well, actually, yeah, turns it into electromagnetic waves, sends it out through your feed line into your antenna, and that sends it out into the world. Cool, cool, cool stuff. All right, the antenna, we're going to talk about some stuff. There is something called different elements. All right. An element is any part of the antenna that's designed either to radiate or to receive or to reflect radio waves. There's something called a driven element, and that's something that is actually supplied with power from the transmitter, meaning that is the signal that you're creating, that you know that you're putting into the driven element. Okay. Then there are parasitic elements, and which are, many of them are reflectors or directors, although they're not directly fed from your transmitter. You know, your feed line does not connect to those elements, but they have a very important part. All right, resonance. Resonance is when impedance has zero reactance. We'll talk about that later. Actually, we'll talk about that in a different chapter. All right, the feed point is where the transmitted energy enters the antenna, and that's what oh, radiation. I don't know why they put this here because it was really covered elsewhere. Radio radioactivity is not radiation. Radio radiation is not radioactivity. It doesn't have anywhere near enough energy to do any kind of harm. Okay, you know, before that, let me do this. Um, can you see this? This is an antenna, right? This is this is a directional Yagi for 2 meters. This was actually built for me by a couple of guys in the club. All right. Now, what I want you to see here is, you know, well, first off, the elements are these metal parts here. All right. We talked about the elements. This right here is um, where the coaxial cable hooks up right here. All right. So the coax from the radio, all right, hooks right into here. This one little part. So this is what's called the driven element. It's receiving the signal from the radio. Now, this back here, this is called a parasitic element. This is actually a reflector, okay? Because this is the front of the antenna. These parasitic elements, all right, again, they're not connected to the radio. These are called, they're actually called directors. I don't think you need to know that, but that's what it is. But while I'm holding this here, in a couple of slides, we're going to talk about polarity, okay? And polarity, normally on 2 meters, especially if you're doing if you're doing FM, you know, full FM, you're going to want vertical polarity, which is like this, okay, with the elements perpendicular to the Earth. Now that's for full FM, all right, and that's vertical polarity. However, for longer distance communications on the 2 meter band, you may use single sideband or data, in which case you would want horizontal polarity, and this would be horizontal polarity where the elements are all parallel to the ground. Okay, so perpendicular to the ground is vertical polarity, parallel to the ground is horizontal polarity. Interesting. For those of you who are builders and like to build stuff yourself, this was built for me by a couple of guys in the club who are way smarter than me. But anyhow, almost everything here is scrap. All right. The only the PVC, the beam is scrap PVC. The uh, the elements are all from an old um, uh, television antenna that was no longer in use. The only part they purchased to build this thing was this little connector here. It was $5 or $6, all right? The thing that connects into the coax. And so this whole antenna is scrap except for that one little part. Ham radio doesn't have to be expensive, depending on what you want to do. Okay? All right. Hey, let's go back uh, to the main part of our program. Okay. All right. So that's uh, okay. All right. Electromagnetic waves. Yeah, we've talked about radio waves. Radio waves are electromagnetic. Oh, I'm getting a message here that says my internet connection is unstable. Can everyone still hear me? Yes? Okay.
You blinked a little bit there when you were changing to the screen, but you're back.
Ah, man, I don't know what that is. All right. Radio waves are electromagnetic waves. Um, and oh, electromagnetic waves. Oh, and I've got a slide for this. Oh, here, that's what I want to show you. Okay, radio waves are electromagnetic waves composed of um, an electric field and a magnetic field. And you see in this diagram here, uh, pointing, okay, the blue in this case represents the electric field, and the red represents the magnetic field. All right. Now, the polarity, the polarity of the wave is determined by the position of the electric field. So in this case, with the electric field being perpendicular to the Earth, this is vertically polarized. If we rotated this 90 degrees, so the magnetic field was vertical, then it would be a horizontal. Then it would be a horizontal polarity. Okay, but you got that? So a magnetic field and an electric field, they are at right angles to each other. Okay, radio waves, yeah, got that. Oh, okay. Vertical and horizontal determined by the elements. No, determined by the electrical field, by the position of the electrical field. Now, there can also be a circular or an elliptical polarization. Now, the thing is, if you're going to be working in the, oh, nice cat, Ace. I have two, but
This
they're
is
not that
sad. He
friendly.
likes when I'm sitting up here on the chair because he can like be involved. He can sit on the top. Correct.
Uh, my
He
cats
got
only
he
come
got
to me when they want to eat. All right.
checked. He just ate, so he's good.
Okay. Now, the thing is, if you're working down in the 10-meter band, all right, 28 megahertz, and you're bouncing your signals off the ionosphere, you end up with no, whether you're sending out with a vertically polarized antenna or a horizontally polarized antenna, your um, your wave is going to end up with elliptical polarization, okay? Which is actually is pretty good. See, we're talking about um, on the 2 meter band, if you're sending out a signal that's vertically polarized and someone's trying to hear you with an antenna that's horizontally polarized, they're going to you're going to lose a lot of signal. They can hear you, but you're going to lose a lot of signal. It's best, if it's the same polarization. But when you get down to 28 megahertz and below, um, you're almost always bouncing stuff off the ionosphere, so it doesn't matter. So if you have a vertically polarized antenna and you're sending out a vertically polarized field, by the time it bounces off the ionosphere, it's going to come back elliptically polarized, and it doesn't matter whether the people on the other end have a vertically polarized or a horizontally polarized. They'll get your signal either way, which is kind of cool. Okay, cross polarization. Oh, okay. All right. I just talked about that. Cross polarization is, you know, um, antennas must match. Yeah. Cross polarization. When the sending antenna and the receiving antenna are differently polarized, if you're in the VHF band, it's going to matter. But, again, if you're sending it through the ionosphere, then it will not matter. Okay. Oh, and that's what it says at the bottom for elliptically polarized. Any antenna will respond. Okay, decibels. You know what? My whole purpose here is to get you past the exam. So to get you past the exam on this whole question of decibels, because I'm not going to go into explaining logarithms. Um, I was good at logarithms in high school. For me, that was 60 years ago. I spent my working career as an accountant and never used logarithms once. So, but I want you to remember three numbers, okay? So when you come to a decibel question on your exam, there's only three questions that can pop up. The answers are either 3, 10, or -6. All right, 3, 10, or -6. Just we'll come to that later, but just remember those three numbers. All right. All right. The thing about decibels is because changes in sound are large, they use logarithmic scales, um, and positive values for decibels are greater than 1, and negative values are less than 1. Yes, obviously. Okay. Um, Gain. All right. Gain is an interesting concept. If you have a transmitter that has 50 watts, all it's ever going to produce in power for your radio wave is 50 watts. That's all. However, however, depending on the antenna you're using, it may or you can get more apparent power, not real power. 50 watts is 50 watts, and that's that. But if you have um, an omnidirectional antenna, say just a regular vertical antenna, all right, just a stick in the air, it's going to radiate all the power in 360 degrees, all right, all around you. In fact, it's going to be more than that because it's really not just going to be flat, it's going to be, some of it's going to be going off the top too. Not a lot, but some of it will go off the top. So but that 50 watts is being sent out in all directions. Um, if you're using a directional antenna, and when you're sending it all out in all directions, it dissipates, or you're going to see this word all throughout amateur radio. Attenuates. It attenuates. It dissipates. Um, as with I think a square of the distance. Any rate, so your 50 watts is just going all over the place, places you want it to go and places you don't want it to go. If you have a directional antenna, all right, instead of a vertical antenna, like this, which sends it everywhere, if you have a directional antenna like this, um, it takes that 50 watts and sends it only in one direction. So it's not sending it, in the 360 degrees all around you. It's sending it, in more like, 20 degrees or 40 degrees. So the power is going more, it's still the same 50 watts, but it's all going in one direction and not being dissipated in others. So you get better distance. Okay? Now, there's one other thing you should know, one other concept, because it may come up on the test, and that's this word isotropic. And sometimes they will talk about an isotropic antenna. An isotropic antenna does not exist. It's a theoretical concept. An isotropic antenna would be if you could have an antenna that is a single point in space and that would radiate equally in a sphere, in a complete sphere. That would be an isotropic antenna. Now, so let's go back to this concept of gain. What gain is that is if, for instance, you're using a directional antenna, how much apparent power, not real power, 50 watts is 50 watts, but how much apparent power, how much advantage do you have using the directional over an isotropic antenna? All right, so with a really good, super efficient directional antenna, you may get twice the distance or more than twice the distance than if you had a theoretical isotropic antenna. So anyhow, gain is often measured against this theoretical isotropic antenna. However, sometimes it will be measured against a standard dipole, but you have to read the fine print to figure out which is which. Okay, antenna radiation patterns. Now this is called an azimuthal pattern, and this is seeing the radiation of what an antenna would do if, for instance, you were looking at it from top down. So like if you could see the radiation pattern and you were up in space and could look down and see the radiation pattern, you can't, but if you could, this is what it would look like. So from this point right here, the 0, 0 point, okay, um, facing in this direction, most of the signal goes this way, right? Now, again, if this was that isotropic antenna, this this dark figure would simply, coincide with the outside circle. All right, but so this is a somewhat directional antenna. Okay, now, oh, okay, all right, yeah, some terminology, right, right, right. Nulls. Okay, nulls are minimum power. Lobes are region between the nulls. Um, The main lobe is the one with the highest gain. Side lobes, you'll see another description there. And forward gain is when you're always talking about gain, you're talking about in the forward direction. You don't care what the gain is going back. The gain going back is nothing. All right. All right. The azimuthal pattern, the elevation pattern. I think the next slide has an elevation pattern. Okay. Well, this has got both. Okay. Now this elevation pattern, this is what it would look like if you could see the radiation pattern if you were standing next to it. Okay, so here we go. So this here, oh, I'm sorry. This here is your main lobe, right? Um, and what this is, you'll notice it has a fairly good takeoff angle. And you say, gee, why isn't it there? Well, you don't want to, you don't want your radio wave going on the ground. You want to point your radio wave. You want it to go up and hit the ionosphere and then bounce off somewhere. Okay? So for this pattern, you got a main lobe here. You've got a side lobe going 90 degrees out, and then you've got something in the back. So this is some kind of a dipole. Okay. Radiation pattern vocabulary. Oh, front to back
Hey,
ratio.
Bob, I just want to throw something out if you don't mind.
Oh, go right ahead. In fact, do you want the do you want to share anything?
No, no, I just
Oh,
wanted to say that this was one of the spots in class when I was taking my tech and while I was studying that this was hard for my brain to wrap around. So, as we've said a bunch of times, we're teaching you to pass the test. We're not teaching you ham radio. Um, there are many, many, many thousands of hams around the world that haven't a clue what we're looking at on the screen right now. And that's okay. Okay. Um, you know, in time, if you work with it, it'll start to make sense to you. But don't worry, don't let it freak you out. Okay. Work on what's the right answer as opposed to the concept, if that helps. So I just wanted to throw that out there. This is one of the things that really um, made me think I'm never going to be able to do this. Um, I'm
oh,
now an extra, so you can do this. You just have to not let the stuff that you may not need bother you.
yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay. Yeah, you may need it in the future, but you with some experience and some practice, you get there. Um, there were many, many things that I simply had to take on faith also. So, okay. Front to back ratio, front to side ratio. That's oh, oh, sure, a little math. Why not? Okay. You're not going to have to calculate front to back ratio for the technician exam or front to side ratio, but that's just a fraction. For those of you who liked fractions, um, of the gain in one direction versus the gain in the other direction. Okay. Oh, feed lines. Feed lines are wonderful. Feed lines are how you get from your transmitter, from your radio to your antenna, right? It's that. So you need to. What you want to do is you want to get your signal out to your antenna with as little loss as possible. Now, um, coaxial cable is certainly the most popular. Some people still do use ladder line. Your book had some uh, interesting, dielectric shield bracket. Why don't we get to the picture? Okay, there's a nice picture. If you want to see one in real life, all right, this is, all right, so this is Ah, no, get back there. Where? Okay. All right. So this is nice coaxial cable. Here's a little piece of coaxial cable. This is something called LMR 400. It's really really good stuff. It's really good stuff at VH level. Um, it's thick and will stand up to a lot of weather. Here's another type of cable. This is kind of the bottom one. This LMR 400, it's very like the top picture, okay? And the bottom picture is more like this, okay? And this is something called RG58, and you'll notice the difference in thickness between the two of them, okay? So this one has much, much less loss. This one has is higher loss, but you know what? This is easier to work with, and if you're working in low frequencies, like the 80-meter band or something, this isn't, it's not great, but it's not bad. It's very good stuff. It's more expensive. This is, probably $1.25 a foot nowadays, maybe even more. But anyhow, but the thing about this is that it's really stiff, so it's a little harder to work with. Okay, and like I say, it's also more expensive. Um, that is the center conductor right there. It's a nice piece of copper. Um, This is the dielectric, which looks like a piece of plastic. And let's see, the outer, oh, this is the braid, the outer conductor. And there. Oh, and then, yeah, the jacket, of course. Same thing, just in smaller scale with the RG58. Okay. Huh. Okay, open wire line. This is sometimes called ladder line or window line, the one on the bottom. The top one is twin lead. You probably see that. Well, maybe not so much anymore. It used to be very, very common with televisions and television antennas, but now I think most of us are on cable. But um, uh, yeah, this is normally just keep this in your mind. These are both higher ohm products than the coaxial cable. The coaxial cable is normally 50 ohms or 75 ohms. All right, this open wire line, this stuff, it's less expensive, it's easy to use, it has lower loss at most frequencies. The problem with it is, and the reason why a lot of people, end up going with coax, is that it's not shielded. So, you can't run this outside your window and then run it along your rain gutters, right? Because the metal in the rain gutters will affect your uh, your radio wave, your electromagnetic wave, right? Whereas in coaxial cable, since it's shielded, it's braided, you can run that along your rain gutters all you want, and or along any metal roof or any metal pole you want because it's shielded and it's protected. So nothing's perfect. Here, they're just saying again, you got to watch your impedances, and these are the ohm ratings in either the coax or in the open wire line. Okay, standing wave ratio. See, the thing is, you know, your antenna is going to have some impedance, and you need to match your feed line with to the impedance of your antenna. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. If you don't do that, if you've got a big mismatch, the problem is you lose a lot of signal. You lose a lot of your radio wave, number one. And number two, if it's a terrible mismatch, what happens is most modern transmitters uh, have circuits built in that will automatically reduce your power for a bad mismatch. See, what happens is, if there's a mismatch between your feed line and your antenna, part of that signal doesn't go to the antenna. It comes bouncing back and bouncing back to your transmitter and hits the your transmitter's amplifier circuits. And if they have this circuits in there that'll reduce the power that you're sending out, because if there's too much power coming back, you'll burn out some parts of your radio, right? So that's what that's all about. Oh, the part that makes it to your the part of your wave that makes it to your antenna is called the forward wave, and the part that gets sent back, gets rejected and sent back to your transmitter, that's called the reflected wave. And with part going forward and part coming back, it creates something called a standing wave of voltage in the current. I'm sorry, not the voltage in the line, and that's not good, right? It's not good. It's a terrible waste of your power, and when you lose power like that, you lose it in the form of heat. Okay, not good. Okay, you measure that with something called an SWR meter. SWR meter kind of looks like this. All right, nice little box, not very expensive. Um, I bought mine at a swap. I think I paid $40 or $50 for it. Um, and oh, I've been through a lot of this. The reflected power is re-reflected at the transmitter, and yeah, it's reflected back to the transmitter, and the transmitter tries to send it back, and then it comes back, and it's not good at all. All right, and all this lost power, it's lost as heat rather than being transferred to the antenna as radio power, as radio wave. Okay, and yeah, nothing's perfect. Ain't that the truth? All right. So ideally, what should the standing wave ratio be? Ideally, it should be 1 to 1. Hardly ever is. Up to 2 to 1, that's fine. Even somewhat over 2 to 1 is fine. They're saying here 3 to 1 is considered high in most cases. I've still transmitted with it at 3 to 1. Um, what happens, if you're getting just a continuous 3 to 1 ratio on your SWR meter, if it's a continuous reading, that just means you've got a mismatch. If the reading gets to be erratic, though, if it's bouncing up and down, it's 3 to 1, it's 1 to 1, it's 3 to 1, it's 4 to 1. What that usually means is you've got a bad connection somewhere, or something's wrong in your feed line. Something is not right. It's either connectors
Or water.
water or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, water in your feed lines is really, really a bad thing.
Yeah. Okay. Um, oh, yeah. Yeah. High SWR. Yeah. You're correct. By tuning or adjusting the antenna, lengthening or shortening the antenna can do it. Uh, and there's also something called an antenna tuner. An antenna tuner doesn't really tune anything. It just makes your radio think that you actually do have uh, a low SWR. It doesn't actually change the SWR in the feed line. Okay, it just protects your um, your transmitter. Okay, SWR meter, yep, it's between the antenna and the transceiver, of course. And oh, either adjust the antenna, yeah, or adjust the power, or okay, dummy loads. Dummy loads are interesting things. Dummy loads really, what you use a dummy load for is, just to test uh, to test your radio and to test its how it's performing. A dummy load. Now there are mechanical or electronic dummy loads, but the simplest dummy load looks like this. All right, and you say, "Gee, that looks like a paint can." Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's a paint can with a nice piece of coax on it that hooks up as though you hook it to your transmitter as though you were hooking up an antenna. All right. And what's inside this? What's inside this is oh, probably about a gallon or so of oil, um, and a great big 50 ohm resistor. Okay, so what happens, if you're trying to tune up your radio, you use this, and so you're not sending out spurious emissions, through the air. You're just sending all the power into into a big resistor. And again, it's like what doesn't hit the air, is turns into heat. Well, that's what the resistor does. It yeah, it can heat up, but it can take it, because it's a big, big resistor. That's its whole job. Okay, and oh, hey, we are smoking. Now, we just have one little other thing. We're just going to talk just a little bit about practical antennas. And, oh, no, 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 no. No, sorry. Slideshow from the beginning. All righty. Okay, antennas. The dipole. You know, uh, as far as you've gotten in the book, you've probably heard about dipoles uh, enough to be tired of them. So, but the dipole, essentially what it is it's a length of wire. All right, it's a length of wire, and the common dipole is a length of wire, the length of which is related to the wavelength, to the length of the radio wave, and normally split in two, uh, connected with an insulator, and then hooked up to your feed line. Okay, now um, to calculate, a good way to, what they tell you to calculate is, and depending on who you're listening to, they say 468 feet divided by the frequency in megahertz. Now, I think in your book, it also will tell you really maybe start with 490 feet divided by frequency. And um, and then you have to adjust from there. Okay, the dipole, it radiates broadside. Okay, so you think about this nice long piece of wire. It's not radiating off the ends, it's radiating off the broadside. So if you want to face south, if you want to broadcast south, um, the two ends of the dipole have to be facing, or one has to be facing east and the other west. So south gets the broadside. Well, north and south gets the broadside. Because what the radiating pattern is going to look like is I think, they've got this one on top, this picture on top. That doesn't really do it for me. This one at the bottom that looks like a bagel, that kind of, I find that easier to understand. Okay, so the antenna, that long wire is going right through it, and I'm just getting a note that my internet connection is unstable. Am I okay?
You were splotching a little bit there, but we were hearing every word.
Okay. Well, maybe that's just the way I talk. All right. Um, okay. So yeah, that's a good radiation pattern. All right. And that's what it looks like in free space. Okay. Now the ground plane. All right.
I got a 2 meter and 70 centimeter dipole that I made here. That's one of the things I like doing in the hobby is I like making antennas. And so this is,
Oh,
vertically
hang on. Mike,
polarized. This is how it
up
would
there
be.
so you get a bigger picture here. Okay. Now that's a dipole, not a Yagi.
Nope, this is a dipole.
Okay.
2 meter and 70 centimeter. 70 centimeters is a short one, 2 meters is a long one. Yep.
Outstanding. Okay, what we're starting to talk about is a ground plane. This is a type of a ground plane antenna like you would see on a car. All right. Normally you would take this and mount it on the roof. Okay. Now, um, what happens here is the long part of this, the whole thing is for the 2 meter band. And this little coil in here, this inductor, what that does is this makes this work on also the 70 centimeter band because that makes in effect for 70 centimeters, that makes it look like a shorter antenna, which it needs to be for the higher frequency. Okay, so normally what happens is, you place this on the roof of your car, and the roof of your car acts as a reflector. Okay, so this is one half. Think of this as though it were a dipole antenna, except this is one part of the dipole, and the other part is the reflector. Okay, the roof of your car acts like the second half of it. Okay.
And a lot of new hams start with, because it can be expensive, they'll start with a mobile radio, a radio you'd put in your car, sitting on their desk in their office, and they'll use an antenna just like Bob showed. But what you have to remember, a lot of people don't know this initially, is it needs that ground plane. So you need to get a cookie sheet or a pie plate or go to Home Depot and get a 12 by 12-inch piece of steel and stick that magnet right to it. That will give you your ground plane. So don't forget to do that or you'll have a really bad signal. And this is another ground plane antenna that I made. Can you see that? Is that showing up very well? Because it's kind
Yep.
of small wires. But this, is for 70 centimeter, and this is the radiating element here. And these are the directors. So these are given the ground plane for the antenna. This one is for 23 centimeter. And, I had some wire lying around and I made this in 15 minutes, each one of these. The only thing I had to buy was this piece that I'm connected to. It's an SO239 connector. Um, and, other than that, I made this, for, it cost me like $4 probably total. So, you can make antennas, save yourself a lot of money, and have the pride that you did it. That's fun.
So Mike, the 70 centimeter, okay, that's 440, but 23 centimeters, is that like 900 megahertz?
It's 20. Hold on for just a sec. I don't have it here. It's 20. Hold on for just a sec. I got it right here. Um, because I don't recall offhand, obviously. It is, come on, show up.
I
Uh, 12,040 to
1240.
13, or
Okay,
1240 to 1300. So it's, um,
that's like,
it's megahertz.
yeah,
One
right.
two four zero megahertz. So it's really in the microwave range.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? I've never used that band. I just,
But,
oh
1100
man.
does 2 meter, 70 centimeter, and 23 centimeters. So that's why I have it.
All right. Okay. All right. So that's what we're talking about. And what Mike was talking about is, you've got the vertical part, but you need that reflector. All right. And the reflector, what it really does is it acts as though it's the second part of the of a dipole, which is kind of cool. Okay, the ground plane. So the ground plane antenna, half of a dipole. Yep. Okay, good. Perpendicular to the ground, with the ground acting as an electrical mirror. Sometimes the ground is that cookie sheet, sometimes it's radials. Okay. And yeah, the car truck. Okay, and then the rubber ducky. The rubber ducky is what you normally get with your when you buy a handheld, and it looks like something like this. And they're very, very convenient. Not terribly efficient, but they're very convenient. But you can have a lot of fun with them. So um, that's fine. All right. And with the rubber ducky, the radio itself and the operator serve as the ground plane, so you're acting as part of an antenna. Okay, that by the way, the rubber ducky, it doesn't work very well inside your car, because your car shields it. Assuming you have a car that's made of metal. Okay, dipole construction. Yep, two lengths of wire. Okay, and see, before they told you 468 divided by the frequency in megahertz. Now they're saying 490 divided by the frequency in megahertz. And as you know, as you raise the frequency, if you want to go to a higher frequency, you need to shorten the antenna. All right. And you shorten each half. You shorten each half equally. Now, that can actually lead to a very, very long antenna. Maybe not all of you can put up a big long antenna, especially those of you who live either in apartments or condominiums or in subdivisions with homeowners associations that prohibit such things. I live in a condominium. I have a townhouse condominium, and I use um, what's called a coil assisted dipole. You know, um, This is something that's called a buddy pole. Now, what I want you to see here is I want you to see that these little coils, there's a coil on this part of the antenna, and there's a coil here. What that coil does is it makes this antenna, and each of these antenna arms, they're only 9 feet long. All right, each one, they're only 9 feet long. But with the coils there, and there's a little tap on them, it makes the antenna look like it's longer. All right. So, you know, when you get up to general and you want to do HF and but you can't put up a full, you know, 60-foot antenna. This is an option. Okay, so that and this thing it's called a it's commercially available. It's called a buddy pole. That's just another view of the same thing. Okay, ground plane construction. All right. For a ground plane, you're going to do 234 divided by the frequency, and then you trim to uh, what you need. The thickness of that vertical piece does affect um, the performance of the antenna. All right, the vertical part, now these are omnidirectional. Now, again, this is a dipole and acts like a dipole. So you see, this end is pointing east, this end is pointing west. So, and this transmits, it sends its signal out broadside. So you see, this is actually going south, and on this side, it's sending the signal north. But the vertical, it sends it in all directions, right? It sends it in 360 degrees. So um, if you want to go to lengthen it just a little bit to a 5/8 wavelength, you get much better efficiency out of it. All right. All right. So for HF, a 40-meter quarter wave whip is 32 feet. That's a lot. And inserting a conductor, I'm sorry, an inductor makes it look longer, so you don't need the whole 32 feet. You've probably seen some cars that have a big antenna on it, but at the bottom there's a big coil. And that's what that coil is doing. It's making the antenna seem longer to the radio. Okay? And those inductors, which is just a big coil, it reduces the physical length that you need. Here is my nice ground plane antenna that I use with the 10-meter band, a 28 to 29 megahertz. And you see the vertical, it's pretty high. And what I'm using as a ground plane here, well, you can't see it very, can I don't think I magnify slide. Oh, there we go. Huh. Okay, now you can see the radials. I've got 4 radials here, and that's what serves as the ground plane. Okay. Now, the directional antennas. All right, these these, you can build yourself or you can spend some money on them. But the directional antennas, again, it takes whatever power you have and focuses it in one direction. So, you get more distance on it. And you also get to point it where you want. If you want to talk to Europe, it doesn't do you any good to have it doesn't do you as much good to have a vertical antenna up there that's sending your signal partly to the east, partly to the west, partly to the north, partly to the south. With a directional beam antenna, a Yagi, you can point the radio wave where you want it to go and get much, much better efficiency out of it that way. Okay? And not only does it send your signal better, but it also reduces interference from other stations. So you're not going to be getting interference from stations. Like if you're pointing east, you're not going to be getting as much interference from stations that are to your north or to your south or to your west. Okay. And that's a nice little Yagi antenna. And this is a different type. This is a quad, sometimes called a cubical quad. And it's another type of directional antenna. You can buy those, you can make them. They're kind of tricky to make, as I understand, but you can, if you're handy like that, and want to take the time. Okay, directional antennas. Yeah, used for DXing. DXing is just a word. DX means distance station. And so if you're going for distance, the beam antennas are so much better for you. Can give you so much more distance. Um, yeah, but beam antennas, now a beam antenna for VHF or UHF is not going to be large. It's going to be really small. Um, a, a beam antenna for UHF, you can actually carry around with you. And so that's what they're talking about. You can use the beam antenna to avoid um, obstructions or to point um, your radio wave to try to bounce off buildings or whatever. Okay, and directional beam antennas. Oh yeah. How am I doing on time? I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. All right. All right. Hey, if you're getting way up in the gigahertz range, the antennas become uh, pretty spectacular, pretty sophisticated. Uh, this one on the left here, I think they're communicating with the stars or something. But the one on the right, um, hams actually use stuff like that, and I don't know where they get them, but I've seen it in the magazines. They're very high gain, but these are for very high frequencies. So it's not the thing that's going to give you. You're probably not going to get Europe on one of these things, but I guess the people that like to play with it find them fun to play with. Okay, feed lines. We've talked about feed lines. Uh, um, the thinner, smaller ones have more loss than the thicker uh, cables. And again, like Mike said before, keep water out. You need that. Um, yeah, yeah, you need to keep things dry. Some of these things, well, like this one with this nice shield on it, this nice hard plastic shield. Some of those are UV rated. Not all of them, but some are. Some are also can be buried, but not all. Okay, common coaxial. Okay, we talked about this. What I showed you the RG58, which is the real tiny one, and this LMX 400 or LMR 400. It's not hardline, but it is much much thicker and uh, stronger, and carries a lot more signal than the much thinner RG58. Usually the RG8 is plenty good enough for most ham applications. And connectors. Okay, connectors. The funny thing, UHF connector, the SO239 and the PL. The PL is plug, the SO is socket. So the PL, what you would call male, the socket, what you would call the female. It's kind of funny. They refer to these as UHF connectors, but they're not really used to UHF. They're really used for they're very common at VHF, and they're very common at high frequency. Down below 30 megahertz. Some of these others, the BNC, that's an interesting connector. You'll see those um, oh, with your handhelds, but they will also be in a lot of other things. BNC, if you need to know what that stands for, it's three guys' names, the guys who invented it, and that's Bannett, Neal, and Conselman. The SMA, that's subminiature type A. The N connectors, which is used um, up at UHF, is a big hunking thing. Okay, and there's a bunch of other things here. I think they do ask about the end connectors, uh, but then a lot of these others, they're not going to ask you anything about on the test. Okay, installing coax, soldering. I don't know why they do this, but in a tech class, but there is one question that can pop up on your exam, and that talks about a cold solder and how do you recognize a cold solder, and that's something that it looks grainy and dull. A good solder should look shiny and smooth. Okay, crimp connectors are being widely used now. Yes, yes. Waterproofing, yes. Type N connect are waterproof, but still usually connected. They're talking about using electrical tape first then. And again, I don't think there's a question on your exam about this, but it's interesting stuff to know. And I'm rushing a little bit because I'm running out of time. Uh, Air core coaxial cable. Oh, air core. All right. As you see, this is not air core. This has a nice solid plastic-like core in it, but there is air core coaxial cable. That you have to be really, really careful to waterproof because watering in the line is horrible. Okay, open feed lines. Flexing will eventually break them. Yes, they're vulnerable to abrasion and twisting. Rain, snow, and ice do affect the lines. Lower loss than coax, but higher impedance, and that may complicate use. Remember, because most of your antennas are going to be, 50 ohms, and well, not always, but frequently, and remember the open feed line is going to be 300 ohms or 450 ohms. Okay, watt meters. We'll just blow through here. A watt meter, a directional watt meter. You can use a directional watt meter for calculating standing wave ratio. And in fact, these days, a lot of SWR meters can be used um, as a watt meter. There's a switch here that lets you either measure standing wave ratio or that lets you measure forward wattage or reverse wattage. So this, although it's an SWR meter, can also be used as a watt meter. Okay. SWR is computed from power balance. Sure. Right. An SWR meter, yes, it's connected between the antenna and the transceiver. Yeah. Antenna tuners, we mentioned this earlier, is that, you need to match the impedance of your feed line to the impedance of your antenna. And one thing that helps your transmitter is having an antenna tuner in there. An antenna tuner, it does not tune the antenna. All it does is it makes your transmitter think that you've got a good match between um, a good impedance match between your feed line and your antenna. So, but the actual standing wave ratio is unchanged. Okay, and and in fact nowadays, if you're going to buy a base station, or even a portable, not a handheld, but a portable, uh, many transceivers have antenna tuners built into them. Okay. So, and what happens is, in order to figure it out, you have to transmit a little bit of a signal because um, SWR SWR doesn't have meaning when you're just receiving. You can receive anything; it doesn't matter. But but it's when you're transmitting, because that's when you're sending power out and you have and you're in jeopardy of getting power sent back to you. Okay, antenna analyzers. Antenna analyzers are cool things. Here's what one looks like. This is a nice one, made in the Ukraine. Um, it's a rig expert. What that does is this will also measure SWR for you, and it will actually show you a graph. And the cool thing about this is that you can hook up your antenna and your feed line right to your antenna analyzer before you hook it up to the um, transceiver, and the antenna analyzer will send out a small signal to your antenna, and it will then measure um, your standing wave ratio, and it will do it over a series of frequencies. Very, very handy, very, very handy thing. And bingo, guys.
And just real quick, Bob, what a lot of people are using now, because of the, and partially because of the expense, instead of the rig expert that you showed there, they're using what's called the Nano VNA.
Yeah.
Nano VNA does, um, I've never compared the two, but what I've read is it does a very similar job to what the rig expert does in the actual analyzation. It's what I use for my antennas because the rig expert, what would you spend like $400 on that, Bob?
Little less than that, yeah, but close, yeah.
And the Nano VNA I got for like 100. It's a little bit of a learning curve to use it, but works pretty darn well. And I know a lot of people that are using them and liking them and having success with them. Um, so just little helpful tools. So, as you're getting into the hobby, you don't go, well, I can't do this because I can't afford it. You know what?
Yeah,
You
you
can.
can.
You can find ways around. And us amateurs, you're done with the class, right, Bobby? That was the last slide.
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. The one of the things that I've found with amateur radio folks is probably 95% of them. If you say, "Hey, I need some help tuning this," somebody said you have a Nano VNA. Can you help me out? They're at your house in 10 minutes. You know, people. People like to help. They like to share their knowledge and like to help you get on the same page with them. And so don't be afraid to ask. If you can't afford it because whatever reason, whether it's not in your budget or whether you're unemployed or whatever it is, you know, we'll help you out. So you just got to ask. And
The thing is,
one other comment I want to make before we go real quick is make sure you're taking practice exams either on the ARRL site or on the hamexam.org. And there's a bunch of them out there, but I can't speak for whether they're good or they're bad. The ARRL I've used, hamexam.org I've used, and they're both excellent. But you should be taking practice exams as often as you can now, just so you can get there. Be leery though of reinforcing the wrong answer. So I don't know if I said this before, but I'll just say it again real quick now. What I was doing when I took my tech exam is someone said that to me, and so I didn't want to reinforce the wrong answer. So I took a test, and if I got the answer wrong, I would write down the question on a piece of paper, and then I would write down the answer. And that helped to lock it in my head. So lots of different
okay.
ways you can do it. Find out what works for you.
I've been using an app called Ham Study, and it's really good. It does kind of that same sort of thing, keeps track of that for you.
Cool.
See, in the slightly more modern version of that, I just open up a Google Doc and I'll like copy and paste the question, and then I'll like type in my answer as well. And if it comes up as the wrong answer, I have a record of like what was the wrong answer until I get the right answer.
Yep.
And that's the same thing that Ham Study app does. It tells you how many times you got it wrong, and it'll keep testing you till you get it right a few times.
Huh.
Yeah, and
Okay.
like I know the ARRL site and also hamexam.org, they weight the answers. So if you got it wrong, you're going to get it sooner. If you got it right, you're not going to get it as often.
Okay.
So,
One thing to go back to the thing about the antenna analyzer, if if you're going to be able to put up a permanent antenna, you're really only going to need an antenna analyzer every now and then. You probably don't even need one. You just borrow one for the day. You know,
yeah.
get your antenna tuned how it is, and then give it back. I have an antenna analyzer because like I say, I live in a condominium, and I have to go put up my antennas, and anytime I want to play radio, and then I have to take it down, and so I'm constantly taking them up and putting them down. So, anyway, all right. Hey, everyone, thank you for showing up. I talked a lot. I keep thinking that I'm going to get through this a lot faster, but it doesn't work. Anyhow,
It happens to me every time too, Bob.
next week, chapter 5. Jerry will be back, and it's a good chapter. It's stuff, stuff, equipment. All right. Thank you, everyone.